Hi, and welcome to the Writer's Room podcast. My name is Sandeep, and our guest for today is Sampurna Chattarji. Sampurna is a writer, editor, translator, and teacher with 21 publications to her credit. Some of her titles are Space Gulliver, Chronicles of an Alien, Dirty Love, and Wordy Gurdy Boom. Her translation of Joy Goswami's prose poems, After Death Comes Water, has been lauded as a living voice and inventive and vivid as the English of Joyce. The most recent of her 11 poetry titles is Unmappable Moves, just out from Mumbai based indie press Poetry One. Hi, Sampurna. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. Looking forward.
The first question to start off this conversation with would be, what gets you going? Why write?
21 books later, the answer, instead of becoming simpler, has become more complicated.
Hmm.
But why would we step back and go to the kernel for, when you ask, why do I write? I write because I must. Okay, now, and that may seem like already a tall story. But I have come to the conclusion that it's mattering more and more.
Hmm.
And it's mattering more and more also when the time to devote to this act of writing becomes less and less. So I value it more. I also value more what it can do. As a young writer, my ambitions felt a lot more achievable. I think it's the confidence that comes with a certain kind of, you are starting on a blank page.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. And I sometimes look back and I think that it's a kind of confidence that is verging on hubris almost, because you think, of course, I can. I have
Right.
language, I
Yeah.
have skills, I have intelligence, I have observation, I have written before.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
almost like a sense of boxes that you've ticked in order to do a little self evaluation, the kind you put at the end of your, every time you
Yeah.
came up for promotion or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was much easier to do then, I feel.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and as I moved from book to book and to book to book, it's not that my confidence got eroded in any way.
Hmm.
It's just that because I kept shifting the goalposts, I kept saying, look, I've done this already. I don't want to do this again. Or
Hmm.
having written this kind of novel, I will now try to write another kind of novel. So it's basically a sense of challenging the self in new ways. I think that has kept me um, from boring myself, I feel. During the pandemic, I found myself writing a text which became a poem, which began writing isn't everything. And when I wrote that line, I wondered to myself if this was the death knell of the writer that had slowly grown over the years. But then what happened as the line unfolded was writing isn't everything unless you make it everything.
Hmm.
And as I tried to understand what this statement meant, I came closer and closer and closer to understanding that sometimes there is a time when writing is everything in a very writerly way, and there is a time when writing becomes somehow extra textual, where everything that is outside writing is either waiting very patiently to enter writing or is teaching you something that writing cannot. Okay.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Hmm.
all of this, so when I say if after so many years, if at the cusp, and I had just turned 50 then, no,
Right.
in 2020. So I was thinking that if half my life is over and this is the kind of statement I'm writing, what's the other half for? Hmm. But in the process of assessing and also plumbing, as it were, the depths of why write at all, the necessity of it became far more evident to me, even to me, somebody who's so committed to, you know, the writerly act, which is simply the act of committing one's thought in writing to paper, no? So that became, and so therefore now I can see with a kind of lack of posture that I write because I must. It is a way of surviving. It's a way of um, keeping myself stable within the shifts that are the life outside writing.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, looking at your career of over what 30 years now as a writer, how do you think you have developed as a writer, or you know, if you've already answered that question in some way, how has your writing practice evolved over the years?
Yeah. How has it evolved? No? I'll
Hmm.
tell you.
Hmm.
It's it's moved from being a kind of luxury uh, to having become a necessity. And let me explain that again. Because it's also related to life.
Hmm.
Because it's impossible to separate the two. When I quit advertising to remake myself as a writer,
Hmm.
it was I could do it. I was privileged enough to do it. I didn't have bills to pay that were demanded a 9 to 5
Hmm.
job.
Hmm.
I was supported. I was lucky,
Hmm.
and so I could give from, let's say, 2004 when the first book came out to 2014 when my father had his first heart episode, and I had to kind of rearrange my entire life and start earning again, and therefore reinsert myself back into what I had left for those 10 years and little more than 10 years, really, 14 years almost. For 14 years, I had the great gift of unadulterated time and attention to that craft. Okay. And which meant also meeting other writers. I mean, it was really an immersion. It was really immersion. And that's how my novels got written, because you can't write novels otherwise in bits and pieces.
Hmm.
So I think, but after 2014, when I realized I had less time, and remember I said when that the less time I had, the more I valued it.
Yeah.
So one of the ways in which my practice has changed, and as I mean literally like the daily practice of it, I no longer can sit at my this very same desk at 9 a.m. and say, okay, now I will write the next chapter of Rupture. So what did I write yesterday and continue till lunchtime? No, I can't do that anymore. I have to find inventive ways by which I can carve out pockets of time to do the writing that is not for, not for earning money, but for the sustenance of the inner being.
Hmm.
So and that sustenance requires me to focus in very short, sharp bursts. It could be night, it could be any time at all. It could be working it into a, I did this once, Sandeep, and do forgive me if this is too much detail, but I at one point I got a little terrified that going to forget how to write creatively, and I'll just be a producer of material for various platforms, or things that I need to do. Um, and I said, how much time can I actually give it? Writing that I'm just doing for myself. And I said, half an hour.
Hmm.
Okay. I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that the format. I'm going to make that the format. I'm going to look at my computer clock. It's 15:22 now. Till 15:52, I am going to write.
Okay.
And whatever I write, that's it for today. If I get half an hour at night, I'll write. As a result, I wrote a series of things which I then later gave it a form. I edited. It's called the Encyclopedia of Every Day. So
Hmm.
I use the
Limitation.
the
Yeah.
limitation, and
Hmm. Hmm.
that is what that is how I have evolved. Whereas
Hmm.
earlier it was wide open playing field. I could go anywhere, I would do anything. I was limitlessly free. And I'm
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
grateful for that, because I would never have built up that body of work. But now I have to be more, it's like, how do it's not like guerrilla warfare, because I'm not fighting for anything
Yeah.
except perhaps my own sanity, because I do
Hmm.
need
Hmm.
things. So I find ways to do it, and I turn them into a form that then becomes acceptable to me as a poet, or
Hmm.
as a fiction writer. This encyclopedia of every day is not really poetry; it's a kind of a hybrid thing.
Right.
So then I invent ways around the limitations that reality has imposed.
That's really interesting. So this is the first time I'm hearing of, you often hear of writers writing 2,000 words a day, writing for X number of hours a day. Some people locking themselves naked till they can, finish that quota for the day. But this is the first time I'm hearing of turning a constraint into, let's say, becoming that the constraint becoming a part of your process, which is really refreshing to hear, because all of us are dealing with such constraints. In some ways, life does get in the way, and yeah, it's just a shift of perspective that's required, I guess.
No,
Right?
also I think it's
Hmm.
like I also was that writer. Like if you
Hmm.
had asked me in 2010, I would have said, I mean, I have said this in interviews, which are all available online.
Hmm.
But then it was, in a sense, it was exactly like that. I was the writer, because that is what I had
Hmm.
remade myself as. But now I'm like I'll be whatever it takes to
Hmm.
make the writing happen, you see. And that's been very instructive to me, to use the limitation.
I have a related question,
Mm,
and also moving on.
mm,
Um, you said that most of, and from what we've talked about so far, most of your writing is a form of self-assessment, a form of evaluation of how we are as humans in the now, right? Um, so, how does one go about researching such a thing before you start writing, or is that even part of your process?
I don't think
Mm,
I don't think I meant that everything I write is a form of self-assessment.
mm,
What
mm.
I did mean is that increasingly, when you look back, is when you are able to assess what every previous version of the self was trying to do. That's
Okay,
really what I meant. Huh? But
right.
I think
Mm,
a lot of writing is self assessment or self assessing, but
mm,
that's not actually what I meant when I said that. So maybe I didn't phrase it correctly. Um, Research as intrinsic to writing process. Huh. And let me give some examples because I think that's where it comes alive. It could be at a very micro level. For example, when I was writing Rupture, no, the first novel that I wrote, my research involved finding out exactly what happens to the victims of a nuclear explosion, radiation.
mm, mm.
Only some of it actually enters the book, but because it was written, the entire premise is that we have only 24 hours to live before the end of the world. And this is because I was thinking of nuclear tests, and I'm very disturbed by. I mean, anybody who's been to Hiroshima or has seen any films on all of that would feel
Yeah, yeah.
a sense of a deep
So, did you
sorrow.
did you speak to people from that time, or how?
No,
What was?
I
Hmm.
used a lot of secondary material. So
Okay.
when it's something historical that I'm looking at, I look at secondary material.
Hmm. Hmm.
I use documentaries a lot to understand what's going on.
Okay.
I research mm, I research so, small things like the one character grew up in a public school in the hills, and the chronicle that I'm thinking that he would have contributed to. So I actually spoke to one of my father's colleagues, and I said, "Okay, do you have any of these old school magazines with you?"
Hmm.
Uh, I also said boys slang. Those boys are using a particular
Yeah.
slang.
Yeah.
I asked him that, is it correct? Is this how? Because I remembered a lot of it because my brother grew up there.
Right.
So I
Right.
remember, but small things like that. So big things
Hmm.
like, what is it like?
Hmm.
It's news articles, if it's historical articles, ensuring that I'm getting them from good sources, and
Hmm.
granular, like what would the slang words have been? Is this
Yeah.
ask somebody who knows? So
Hmm.
that is for one. A great deal of research I had to do on a subject I didn't know was for the other novel, which is called Ella, which is about an adopted girl or
Hmm.
adopted child.
Hmm.
And while I could fully enter her being as a 13-year-old who's having a meltdown on finding out she's adopted, the psychology of late adoptees, when they come to know later, there is a particular psychosis that they go through. So I had to read a lot of papers,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so I read a lot of papers, and I also spoke to people, friends of mine who had adopted children, and they led me to other material. Um, Interestingly, Sandeep, Land of the Well, for
Hmm.
which I did the least research, that was based on psychosomatic illnesses among the young, successful corporates, because I think there I was my own guinea pig, having emerged from advertising and finding, okay, this, there are scars that you don't actually ever get over, you don't even acknowledge.
Right.
I I was my own guinea pig, and I was like, hmm. And later, it's uncanny, because in Delhi, when I had that book event, na, I was in chat with conversation with Ambarish Satve,
Hmm. Right.
and he, uh, when we were talking, he said it was amazing, because he said, which of the medical journals did you read? I said, I didn't, and I thought he was being sarcastic.
Right.
I said I didn't read them. And some of the things I had checked up, symptoms, one or two
Hmm.
symptoms here and there. But most were on observation of people, other people who had suffered from some of those illnesses or syndromes or whatever.
Hmm.
Some he even gave clinical names too. He said, but that character is actually suffering from this. I must say, I felt rather validated. I mean, one shouldn't look for validation in that manner, but I felt very like pleased that something got it right. So
Yeah.
piece of research, I think, will also depend on what the project is.
Hmm.
You as a person, are you going to do it in a very systematic way? Are you going to do before, after,
Hmm. Hmm.
during?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
going to be a mixed media research, all those things. Yes. And even for poetry, very often everybody thinks for poetry you don't have to research. Not true at all.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And you, like you mentioned, you're going down into the depths and trying to sort of immerse yourself in that world,
Yes.
uh, because for many reasons, sometimes it may be a fantastical world that you're creating. At other times, there may be logistical constraints. You may not be able to visit Japan, right? But even then, I think what you're trying to say is your research does not end till you are able to visualize what's going to happen. Am I right in saying that?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And very often experience, because I
Hmm.
have been to Japan and I have been to that.
Hmm.
This is long before I had any intentions of ever writing a novel. I was still working in advertising.
Hmm.
I think every experience that you have somehow is you're storing it away for that, for when it becomes material, no?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in that sense, everything is material. It's one of the dreadful things about being a writer, is that everything is material.
Yeah. There's a saying writers are always taking notes.
Well, at least mentally,
Yeah.
it's all entering, and it's really dangerous.
Yeah. It must be terrible to have a writer as a friend because at some point you're going to show up in some form or the other.
Apparently,
Hmm.
there's a story that Salman
Hmm.
Rushdie used to tell, where when he read from Midnight's Children,
Hmm.
I think in Lahore or somewhere,
Hmm.
and somebody came up, some family man said, and was very angry with him, and said, "You put everyone in the book except me." So it could work either way. I may
Right.
have misremembered the story, but the kernel was, if why
Yeah.
did you leave me out? So yeah, it worked
that's
both ways.
that's really fun. That's really fun. Okay. Okay. Um. All right. So I have a question about form. Right. You mentioned encyclopedia of everyday and how that started out as this activity of writing 30 minutes every day. How did you arrive at it being that hybrid piece that it was finally published as? So how did it arrive to that point? It must have had like different phases of the project would have seemed like okay, maybe this can be a collection of essays or maybe it can be a collection of poems. I don't know, memoir maybe. So how did you undergo that process?
I'll have to say that it's entirely intuitive.
Hmm.
I don't have like answer for that in a
Hmm.
very um it's not a it is
It
it's
wasn't
intuitive.
predetermined.
No. So
Right.
when I wrote that first thing, it was
Hmm.
more like a survival tactic, right? I
Right.
was
Right.
thinking, talking to, I wasn't calling it encyclopedia of everyday or anything. The
Hmm.
title comes later. When
Hmm.
you start realizing that this is tending towards a body. When the first piece I wrote as a sort of self surviving mechanism.
Hmm.
I'm just trying to gather myself together in a place of silence and attention, with the desire to use that half an hour
Hmm.
productively, and productively as a writer. So therefore some output which is written should emerge at the end of the 30 minutes. Okay.
Hmm.
As I went along, I will tell you because this is important. As I went along, and I think internally I was already making up some rules for myself, saying that suppose I have an interruption in this half an hour, suppose the doorbell rings, suppose something happens, that interruption will enter my home. I'm not going to do it. All right. Suppose there is I think I made three rules after the first very intuitive draft. And when I looked at it, I said, this is what happened. And I realized that something that I had been reading,
Hmm.
whether it's a newspaper article, my horoscope, or somebody's tweet, would enter. Something that was a fact would enter. If there were interruptions, so be it, it would enter. A memory could enter, which had nothing to do with the present moment because it was so deeply rooted in the present. And very interesting that you use the word memoir because Sandeep, what did happen, and this I think took me by surprise, memory entered it very, very bizarrely. So I started thinking about writing about something. I mean, I wish I had it with me here. I could have shown you. Started writing about something, and suddenly I was thinking of my parents' time in Sikkim and in Gangtok, and uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
things like that. So I let it in. I didn't say, "Oh no, no, you don't belong here." There were no intruders. There were no
Hmm.
trespassers on
Hmm.
this piece of writing, because I was creating it in that spirit of openness. You see, and but as I realized after the first one and the second one, I realized certain rules had already established themselves. Those then became the determining factors for the ones that followed, so that it didn't become shapeless,
Right.
because when we speak of form, we are trying to arrive at a shape, no?
Hmm.
So, and if that shape doesn't already pre-exist and you're making it up as you go along, literally, these rules are fun to make because they're
Yeah.
coming from the process,
Yeah.
and you trust the rule because it appeared organically, and you say, "Ha, it's working." And then when you finish and you edit, then you say, "Okay, maybe I overdid that," but that comes later. So I enjoyed it very much. And it was the first time that I did it. And maybe the last time because that's what I needed then.
What a
Mm.
wonderful game. It
It was
sounds.
a game.
Yeah.
It started as a game, and
Hmm.
and it really, in that sense, it also did what I wanted it to do. It saved
Hmm.
me from despair,
Hmm.
from only writing copy for pharma companies or something like that. It
Right.
really
Right.
it kept that language, like, I love language, but
Hmm. Hmm.
language is also, it's constantly getting corroded. Now we are using it
Hmm.
all the time, and
And
for various many reasons, from
yeah,
functional to the, so then you need to keep it alive in some way.
amazing. Thanks so much, Sampurna. And that concludes the discussion for today. We have a few questions that came in. Okay. I've finished my first draft. How do I start editing?
Hmm. First question in return, it would be first draft of what?
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So first, I mean, I will not get the answer to that. First draft of what? Because depending on what it is, the nitty-gritties will differ. How do I go about it? Get yourself an editor, unless you're already accomplished as a self-editor.
Hmm.
You need another person. You need another set of eyes, if not a whole room full of other set of eyes. Get yourself an editor who will read and who will be ruthless.
Yeah.
This I cannot emphasize enough. It's very hard to be ruthless with your own writing, which is why you need a very good editor who will do you the great honor of reading you carefully and critically.
Right.
Which is the
Right.
first step.
Hmm. So yeah, and for the listeners, if they are not able to get a professional editor on board, perhaps sharing it with your friends can be the first step,
Yes,
and getting honest feedback from friends and
yes.
family.
This is why I said a
Hmm.
room full of
Hmm.
eyes, because that room full could be your writers group. I'm hoping you have one or two trusted um, people. The problem with sharing it with family is they will invariably love what you do.
Yeah.
Um, very, very rarely will you find people who will say, so,
Hmm.
and when I say professional editor, the thing is that if you're thinking of writing as some sort of professional commitment, quote unquote professional, as in it matters enough for you to hone it to that level, you will have to seek out that kind of help. Okay.
Hmm.
To
Hmm.
seek maybe senior writers who already published something.
Hmm.
I cannot emphasize enough the need for every writer to have a community. Okay, a community of other writers and readers who are not your mirror image necessarily, who are bringing very different talents, with whom you can quarrel and who will be honest with you. Okay, so the more important than even cultivating the writerly self in splendid isolation would
Hmm.
be to seek out kindred souls whose values and whose judgment you can trust.
Amazing. And that could be by joining a book club, or maybe signing up for, workshops. That's how you're going to find
Absolutely.
your community. All right. Okay. So there are two interesting questions, Sampurna. I'll let you pick the one that you would like to answer. The first one is, how long should it take to write a novel? and and the second one is about the publishing industry. How do I pitch my story to a publisher?
So I'll answer the first one, because how
Hmm.
do I pitch? You'll find in
Hmm.
innumerable
Hmm.
help, um, help and hack kind of videos online, I'm sure,
Hmm.
and also very valuable publishing related workshops that are
Hmm.
conducted online. All these started during the pandemic years, and some of them are still going on. I myself did some for an organization in Kolkata, which were based on editing. They had a series of specialists talking. So keep your eyes and ears open for these kind of offerings, and go for it. I'll answer the first one, because how long should it take? Again, it depends entirely. How long? How can you work backwards? You can't. You can't say I have. Maybe I can, because I've just said publicly that I work backwards using time as a constraint. Suppose you had 1 hour, 1 hour to write a novel. Could you? No. Okay, you could write a text. So do not set time is a constraint, is a valid constraint only for certain kinds of writing. So if you have a book review to send in, or you have a news report to send in, you have a deadline, you work towards the deadline, you make the best of it. Okay. But when you're writing a novel, you have to be ready for the long haul. And how long that haul is depends on a multitude of factors, including what is it about, how accomplished are you already, how many novels have you written already, how many hours do you have, what is the subject, how well do you know it, does it involve traveling, have you done all your work already, and therefore the writing time is only writing time. um, all of these. And to give you two examples from my own, so that you know that I'm not talking through my hat in abstract terms. Ella, which is the shortest of the three novels that I wrote, took me about 2 years, with a massive interruption in the middle, because halfway through I did not know what to do until
Hmm.
I hit upon the idea of a novel within a novel. And I found the solution and I proceeded. Also because it was very research heavy, also because it was interrupted by all the other things I was doing. Hmm. Rupture and Land of the Well. Uh, I think I wrote the first drafts of those very, very fast, because I was so intent on making up for lost time. I had an internal demon that was spurring me on.
Hmm.
I would have, I think I would have spent about 6 to 8 months putting the first drafts. That's very fast, according to me. and then revising it takes another year. Then it's a long haul. We won't go into that. Remember that I finished writing both the drafts uh, in about 2 years from the time I gave up advertising, but they came out almost 10 years later. Okay. And I am so glad that happened, because they would have been severely diminished pieces of work if time had not played its role.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. So there is no one answer. Figure it out as you go along.
Yes, figure it out, and the answer will come to you. Thanks so much, Sampurna. Before we close, would you like to, just share a few words about the book you released, Unmappable Moves?
Mappable moves.
Yes.
Hmm. What will I say about it? Except that in many ways it is uh, a homage to the writers who made me who I am. Um, it was written, as I say, in my dedication during the most unfree of times. Um, it's it it fell into and I think that's why it's called unmappable moves, because it wasn't something that I had planned, but I looked back on the last few years and it seemed that like the time was right to not keep the writing that had been squirreled away from 2012 onwards, actually, if you look at it chronologically. So 10 years of writing work, again within a very specific format. um, I felt it was time to put it out into the world, and in a very particular form. So I'm very happy with the way the form has turned out for those who are interested. And what else can I say except read it and tell
Yeah.
me what you think of it.
Yeah. Wonderful. So we'll be linking Unmappable Moves in the description of this podcast. Thank you so much, Sampurna. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I hope we do this again.
Thank you, Sandeep. It was very, very, very special.